Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board.
This is Jane. She thinks she's just filling her car, but she's also filling the air with cancer-causing toxic chemicals used to boost octane in gas. What doesn't burn in the engine enters the air and your lungs, even your heart and brain. Bad for everyone, especially kids. Ethanol is a natural octane booster, clean burning and non-toxic. More ethanol means less scary stuff in our gas and in the air we breathe. And that makes your choice pretty plain, Jane. American Ethanol, cleaner air for Nebraska.
Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board.
Welcome to this week's edition of Market Journal. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. On this episode, Roy Smith discusses a tough stretch for corn and soybean prices. Alan Tiemann describes the expansion of the Panama Canal. Lee Schulz looks at the inventory of U.S. hogs and pigs. Bob Wright explains how growers can scout for grasshopper damage. And Amit Jhala talks about new weed control options. Roy Smith is our corn and soybean market analyst this week. The USDA's latest progress report rates the U.S. corn crop identical to a week ago, including 3/4 of the crop in good to excellent categories. The country's soybean crop slipped slightly from the previous ratings. 70% is now good to excellent, 2 points less than last week. Markets started the first full week of July violently Tuesday as soybean futures lost more than 5%. Both commodities continued their slide Wednesday before heading in different directions as of this taping on Thursday. We talked with Roy Thursday afternoon and started by asking about market price movements over the past few days.
It's been a bad week. That's about as simple as I can make it. We passed the drop dead date that I've talked about before on here. We passed the seasonal trend change from long to short, and I've talked about that on here before, and so now where we're at is trying to make the best of a bad situation. And that's going to be tough to do with the rain that we got last night here again in dry eastern Nebraska. It's just, I guess you can say maybe looking for some kind of a storm or something like that, but there's nothing on the horizon that tells us that that's coming.
What things were all behind this week, and specifically in soybeans where we saw some really graphic movement?
Well, more than anything else, huge positions on the long side from the big speculators, and probably the small ones too. You know, I'm sure there were farmers that sold their beans in April and bought back futures or bought back call options. And if that was the case, which I'm sure it was, why they got caught on the wrong side also. They were playing a big boys game and probably lost at it. So we've got all of those things that come into play, and not the least of which is a huge supply of soybeans available to the trade, you know, whenever they want them.
What does the seasonal chart show as far as where we could go from here?
Well, the long-term seasonal chart, first of all, it showed that it was time to get out of the long positions, either cash or futures, about 10 days ago. And the timing was excellent on that. If everybody did it, why, there's not too many people that are unhappy. What the charts show then from now on is that there's probably going to be a washout or a sell-off in the cash beans and the futures as the market tries to figure out, you know, just exactly how many beans are out there. We already know how many acres were planted, so that's not a risk factor anymore. And so what we're looking for is some kind of a 50% retracement, or under today's conditions, probably less than 50%. Back up, a bounce, dead cat bounce if you want to call it that, but at least a technical bounce that retraces some of what we lost. And when that happens, and when you see a day when beans are 25 or 50 cents higher, you want to sell something.
What are your expectations in corn?
Corn didn't go up nearly as bad or as much as beans did, but it hasn't gone down as much either. Now we had a little helping hand from the Brazilian government saying, well, we really don't have a big corn crop coming after all. And Wednesday of this week, the trade was trading on the fact that, it's fact, and I use the term loosely, trading on the idea that Brazil is short on corn, and they don't have nearly as much to sell as in a lot of years, and so that may be the one thing, plus purchases by China and Mexico. They, notwithstanding what the market's done, other markets have done, they just keep buying those beans, and of course that's what we want, and that was part of what was behind the rally we had in the spring.
What are the dates ahead to keep in mind? And I assume one of those is something around the September crop report.
September crop report, one of my rules is make a sale the day before the September crop report. That's not necessarily a fundamental supply and demand situation, but it is a kind of a rule of thumb that I have, that the market trades down going into the trades up going into the September crop report. When the report comes out, they find that it's not as bullish as they thought, and then the market kind of falls apart again. And between now and the 1st of September, we normally have up and down once, and then up and down the second time, and the second time it stays down through harvest. So those are things to watch for. If you didn't get any beans sold, you maybe want to put a mark on your calendar and say, I'm going to sell something when we see this.
We'll have Hog Market Analysis in a few minutes. Next week, Luke Beckman from Central Valley Ag will join us to look at corn and soybean markets. A container ship leaving a port on the coast of Greece made history last month when, after 14 days on the water, it completed the inaugural voyage through the expanded Panama Canal. On its way to Asia, the ship's passage on June 26th marked the completion of a $5 billion expansion project to the Panama Canal that began in 2007 and created a new set of locks for a third lane of canal traffic. Seward area producer Alan Tiemann serves as the chairman of the U.S. Grains Council and was one of an estimated 25,000 people to attend the inauguration ceremony. As you'll see in his photos and video from the opening, the development is a big deal, especially to those in the area. We talked with Alan at his farm recently to learn more about the canal's importance and the reasoning for expanding it.
Well, it's just global trade and the importance of global trade, and up to this point we've had Panamax size vessels, which means the maximum size would fit in the Panama Canal. We've got Neo-Panamax vessels now able to traverse the 50 miles across Panama without having to go all the way around South America. So it's really enhancing global trade and really truly a need, and maybe even a need for larger expansion in the future.
What are the dimensions of this canal compared to previously?
Okay, the new locks are 1,400 feet long and 180 feet wide, 60 feet deep, compared to the old locks, which were 1,000 feet long, 106 feet wide, and only 40 feet deep. The way they measure what goes through these is in total equivalent units, which is 20-foot containers, 8 foot high. In the old locks, they could get 5,000 TEUs on a ship to go through there. In the new set of locks, they'll be able to handle ships with up to 14,000 TEUs, almost 3 times the capacity in the new locks compared to the old locks.
Walk me through the timeline of how long it took to complete this process.
I think they started letting bids for this process back in 2007. They broke ground in 2009. They had hoped to be completed in 2014, which would have been the 100th anniversary of the original set of locks in the Panama Canal. And so they're a couple years behind schedule, but I think as construction goes, that was almost to be expected.
You were there for the opening. Tell me about the ceremony and kind of the day's festivities.
It was there for 2 days. The ferry on Saturday we had the opportunity to go out and walk up close and personal with the locks, get to look at the basins where they push the water back up to conserve water. These locks actually use 7% less water than the original locks, moving a much larger ship. But anyhow, we were able to go look at all the facilities up close and personal then, and Saturday evening we had a more formal event which included the President of Panama and some other speakers, dignitaries there that kind of patting themselves on the back, if you will, for the accomplishments of getting this done in the grand opening, which took place on Sunday. And it was a major event, a regular festival, jubilee, fireworks, and dignitaries, and it was an all-day event to watch the ship come through, container vessel, and so it was really quite the spectacle to see and a historic event to attend.
For U.S. customers, what's the importance of the Panama Canal?
Oh, it's just all about trade. You know, it's a neutral territory. Anybody can use the canal, and it enhances our ability to ship grain to other countries, especially Asia, through there. Right now, the big advantage is going to be in container shipping, and we do ship, say, distillers' grains and like in container ships. So hopefully with the larger ships, lower freight rates, that'll benefit us all the way through the market chain.
The U.S. Grains Council has an office in Panama City, and so that's one of the reasons that you know a little bit more about the Panama Canal. What's the importance of that office there, and tell me about its operations?
Okay, in Panama City, that operates as a hub for the whole region of South America, Central America, Mexico, and so they coordinate all of our market development in all that area. So it's an extremely important office. We've got a lot of activity in that region, especially with the free trade agreement we've got. Colombia has just been a hot pocket of demand, and so we're really excited. I know our office staff there do a lot of traveling back and forth. They are really working to build ethanol and distillers grains demands in Peru and Chile, and so they're busy in that region.
Panamanians approved the Panama Canal Expansion in a 2006 referendum with more than 75% of voters in favor of the project. The United States completed construction of the original Panama Canal in 1914. We also have a look at hog markets this week with Iowa State Extension livestock economist Lee Schulz. The USDA's latest quarterly hogs and pigs report, released at the end of June, tallied all hogs and pigs in the country at 68.4 million head, the highest June 1st inventory since estimates began in 1964. The pig crop from March through May was also the largest since 1971. Markets showed strength during the first half of June, but began to slide mid-month. We started by looking at what led to the strength before the reversal when we talked with Lee Thursday morning.
Well, I think it's a variety of factors. You know, first, we can look at really the market's been this year trading on steady supplies, anticipation that supplies are going to be a bit higher than last year. So I think that's really priced in the market. But really, I think the market's been trading at, especially when we look in June, was, you know, the speculation that we're going to continue to see really increased purchases from China, Hong Kong, that really robust export demand that's going to really help eat up some of that extra supplies that we have. And I think that's really what we've seen drive the markets. Also, the rally in the corn market did help, I think, support what we'd seen in the futures prices for hogs gaining.
Is that partially what caused the drop then starting mid-June?
You know, I think it is a bit of the flip side there. We did see really corn prices back down to pre-rally levels, really corresponded to similar price declines in the hog prices. Also, I think when we look at that export trade, a lot of our data is a little bit dated when we look at April. And so when you're looking at some of the weekly data that is official, but really not the official numbers, points to maybe a little bit under what we expect, maybe underwhelmed expectations a little bit. Also anticipation that supplies are increasing with hogs, as we see now a seasonal increase. June was actually a rather large slaughter month. And I think market participants really got a handle of what that did to pork supplies.
Can you explain just how important China and Hong Kong specifically have become to the international export market?
Well, when you look at those markets, those markets really have a potential for explosive demand. I think a lot of times we really point to 2011 as a time when there was some explosive demand there. They are the number one importer of pork. Really, that is a target destination for a lot of exporting countries. When you look year to date for the U.S., there has been significant gains of exports to Hong Kong, up about 61% year to date. Mainland China up over 170% year to date. And so with their tighter supplies, due to some herd reductions and some health issues in their herds in China, that really does point to likely increase of those exports. I think the real question is how large can those exports get here in 2016 and into 2017.
What did June's quarterly hogs and pigs report show that you thought was a big takeaway?
Well, I think not too much all that surprising. We knew inventories are larger. We've broken records the last several quarters. If you look at a month over month or a year over year standpoint, a bit of a surprise was, I think, when we looked at pre-report expectations, expected to come in even to maybe 1% year over year higher. It actually came in about 1 to 2% year over year higher. So when we look at it overall, a bit bearish when we look at the inventory numbers.
What's your price forecast for the rest of the summer, and then how do you think per head profits will play out through the rest of 2016?
Well, I think, when we look at the prices, very much going to be dependent on that demand situation and looking towards the export markets. We know slaughter is going to be 1 to 3% higher for the rest of the year here. For the third quarter, I'm really looking at prices 75 to 79, and we're looking at Iowa, southern Minnesota cash prices. That's going to be very much driven by what we're seeing here in July and August. When we get into the fourth quarter, big question mark there. Right now, I think we're seeing prices about 62 to 66 on a cash market basis. There could be a few weeks that we do drop into the $50 range, depending on what slaughter levels are. First quarter next year, I think we're going to be a bit better at maybe 63 to 67. And then second quarter of 2017, we're looking right in that $70 to $74 range.
Per head profits?
For per head profits, I think second quarter, third quarter here, what we've seen is about $22 per head profits. Fourth quarter, we're looking at right around break even to maybe $1 below break even. First quarter of next year, similar story, break even, maybe $1 or $2 above break even. And then second quarter of next year, we're looking right in that range of $14 to $16 per head profits.
The USDA's next quarterly hogs and pigs report is scheduled for release September 30th. The July Nebraska farmer says people driving on Highway 385 south of Bridgeport may have noticed an unfamiliar sight over the last year. A center pivot with drop nozzles hanging just 30 inches off the ground, accompanied by a sign highlighting the pivot's low-energy precision application system. Father and son Nick and Nicholas Lapizotis are the owners of the unit and say their decision to go to this type of system was largely driven by water use efficiency. You can read more about their system in the July Nebraska Farmer. Nebraska's crops entered July with favorable condition ratings. Nebraska's National Agricultural Statistics Service lists 80% of the state's corn and 77% of its soybeans in good to excellent condition. As we mentioned in the previous episode of Market Journal, growers have noted the presence of grasshoppers. We recently talked with Nebraska Extension entomologist Bob Wright to learn when farmers need to scout and possibly treat for those insects.
We've been getting reports all across eastern Nebraska the last couple of weeks that people are seeing small grasshoppers on field borders, and in some cases also moving into crop fields now. And this is something to monitor for before they get too big or start doing damage.
Can you explain more about that time frame, when they're in borders, and then how they decide to move into the field itself?
Okay, the eggs are laid or survive in untilled areas, either perennial crops like alfalfa or pasture or grassy borders. And most of the common species that cause damage to crops hatch out in the spring. And when they're small, they start feeding in the borders. And then as they get larger, or as the borders dry down, they start moving into the nice, lush, irrigated crop areas.
What kind of damage do they do?
The grasshoppers cut holes in the leaves, and so they can do severe defoliation if they're abundant enough. Later in the summer, they can feed on soybean pods or corn ears, but that'll be a while before we see that. But mainly it's feeding on the leaf tissue, and if it's abundant enough, they can cause yield loss from defoliation.
This is a pest that can be managed?
Yes, and it's a lot easier to manage them with insecticides while they're small. Once they get half grown or larger, or certainly as the adult stage, they're a lot less sensitive to insecticides. So if you have high numbers, you want to treat, particularly if you can treat them in the field borders before they get into the crop, and while they're small, that'll save you money later in the season.
Do you have specific treatment options?
Yeah, there's multiple insecticides. The issue is you have to be sure to understand what site you're treating. There's some insecticides that are labeled for use on non-crop areas or perennial grasses, but are not labeled for particular crops, and maybe, let's say, corn or soybeans. So if you're just treating the field borders and not spraying the crop, you have one set of options. If you're spraying both the border and the crop, there's less insecticides that are labeled for both sites. And so be sure that whatever insecticide you're using is labeled for the site you're spraying on.
At a certain point, do they move on, or can they affect the field throughout the season?
When they become the adult stage, they can fly around and disperse, and whatever is the most lush field they'll go to, but they'll be immatures for a good month or more before they turn to adults. So be watching and make a plan for how to deal with them.
Bob has an article on CropWatch about scouting and controlling grasshoppers. We'll link to that story on the Market Journal website if you're interested in learning more. Nebraska's soybean growers planted 96% of their crop to a herbicide-resistant variety this spring, 2 points higher than the national average and a point more than last year. Iowa's producers used a herbicide-resistant variety in 97% of their soybeans. At last week's Weed Management Field Day near Clay Center, Nebraska Extension Weed Management Specialist Amit Jhala explained how new tools may be able to help soybean farmers better control resistant weeds in their fields.
We do not have any new herbicide coming to the market with a new mode of action, but we have some multiple herbicide tolerant soybean that are coming to the market. For example, Roundup Ready to Extend soybean that will be tolerant to dicamba as well as glyphosate. So that will be one tool in our toolbox. We should able to apply dicamba on top of the soybean that will control glyphosate resistant broadleaf weed species. Plus we have Enlist corn and soybean coming to the market. Enlist system is tolerant to 2,4-D choline, which is a new formulation of 2,4-D, and it will be effective on control of some glyphosate resistant weeds. Plus we have Balance Bean coming to the market that will be tolerant to Balance Pro or Balance Flex type of herbicides in soybean, which are basically pre-emergence corn herbicides. But with this tolerant herbicide tolerant soybean variety, we should able to use those type of herbicides applied pre-emergence as well as glufosinate based herbicides post-emergence. So that will be a new herbicides to be used in soybean, and all these new tools are really effective and that can provide excellent weed control if it will be used as per the label directions.
You can learn more about weed control at Tuesday's Resistant Palmer Amaranth Management Field Day near Shickley, Nebraska. The July 12th event begins at 8:30 and runs through 1:30 with a free lunch, field tours, and a keynote speaker who will discuss research on controlling Palmer Amaranth. The event is free to attend and sponsored by the Nebraska Corn Board. We'll link to more information about it on the Market Journal website. Now with this week's weather forecast, here's Nebraska Extension Ag Climatologist Al Dutcher.
Well, folks, here we again for the weekly forecast. During this past week, we did deal with some thunderstorm activity, particularly last weekend. And then, of course, during the midweek period, as we've seen a couple complexes move from the Dakotas south and southeastward through eastern Nebraska, central Nebraska. Some very heavy precipitation was reported as we were into the Wednesday night, Thursday morning time frame across the I-80 corridor. We've seen totals anywhere from an inch to upwards of 3 inches in this area. Unfortunately, some of that precipitation did not reach that extent in southeastern Nebraska, although the areas that were impacted by the heavy precipitation were sufficient enough that we would expect to see some shrinkage of the abnormally dry conditions that were depicted on this week's drought monitor as we go into next week's edition. That is, if we couple it with some additional precipitation chances that may be in the forecast as we look forward into the future. So let's go to those maps and see what we have going on for today. We have high pressure ridge trying to build in the atmosphere, so the warm front of the surface is starting to move through the state, and we do see it depict on the models at least a chance for some isolated thunderstorm activity to develop in advance of that warm front. That's depicted here in this little bit of red. weak chances at most, but we should see the best areas of precipitation being east central southeast and portions of south central Nebraska. Now as we go into tomorrow, we will see that that ridge tries to build a little bit farther northward, so basically putting a halt to all precipitation in the northern plains. We see a trough to our west, and we see some energy ejecting out of the southwestern trough, and that may impact portions of western Nebraska with some late day afternoon thunderstorm activity. But more importantly, as we go into Monday, we start to see this ridge translating toward the east, bringing very warm conditions to the eastern Corn Belt, and we see this big trough poised to move across the northern plains. Therefore, we'll start to see a surface front dragging through the region as we get late Monday, Tuesday time frame, and that would develop some thunderstorm activity in association with some of the monsoon moisture that's pooled up in the Central Rockies. A fairly decent chance for precipitation breaking out in western Nebraska, and most of that carrying over as we go in the day on Tuesday, where we have a considerable amount of lift across the entire region. So this looks like our best chance for scattered thunderstorm to more concentrated thunderstorm activity, and eastern Nebraska looks to be the most likely area that we would see the heaviest precipitation totals. Now as we go into Wednesday, we'll start to see that the front basically lays itself in a west to east fashion across the central plains. So to the south, very warm conditions, to the north, much cooler than normal conditions. And so in Nebraska, we'll see a wide range of temperatures approaching the 90 degree mark in the south, and we'll probably be looking at the mid to low 80s across the north, with still an isolated chance for thunderstorm activity. As we go into Thursday, we see the same type of formation. Most of the activity remains to our north, and we are into this blue, which means there's subsiding air, so we don't expect much more in the way of moisture. And then we start to see the ridge building into next weekend with the heat starting to return in earnest. If we look at the 8 to 14 day forecast, next Thursday to the following Tuesday, the heat still stays in the east. And in terms of precipitation, we see widespread precipitation in the east. I think we're overdoing it here in Nebraska. Now for the last 2 weeks of the month, which takes us from the middle of July to the end of July, above normal temperatures almost the entire country. And in terms of precipitation, below normal precipitation from western Texas, northeastern through the eastern Corn Belt.
Thanks, Al. Today's interviews can be found individually on the Market Journal website and through the Market Journal mobile app. They include information on corn and soybean markets, the Panama Canal, hog prices, grasshopper damage, and weed control. As always, you can keep up with Market Journal during the week by following us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Next week, Luke Beckman will look at corn and soybean markets, and Bob Klein will discuss weed management after harvesting winter wheat. Until then, thanks for watching. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. We'll see you next week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.